Helen Stubbings of Hugs and Kisses. Welcome back. In the last video we talked about my applique paper and how to prepare it, trace our templates or print them and cut them out ready for the next step in the process. Now the applique method that I use, I call it gluestick applique, or it could be called a prepared needle turn applique. The finished result you get looks like needle turn but with a much simpler process. So we've traced or printed and cut out all of our required shapes to make our little project. Next step is to fuse those onto the wrong side of your chosen fabrics. So we need to hold it up to the light and see which is the shiny side. The shiny side goes down onto the wrong side of the fabric. If it faces up, it's going to go onto the wrong side of the iron, and we don't want that. Whoops. So I'm going to position it now. Because my fabric is quite geometric, I'm going to fuzzy position these. I can see through enough on the back of the fabric. I'm going to position each of my pieces so that they're all going to be in the same place on the fabric, and I'm going to be able to, there we are, have them, you'll see the effect once we cut them out and turn them over. You need to leave a large 1/8 of an inch or a small 1/4 of an inch in between each shape. So we don't need a full seam allowance, 1/4 inch seam allowance, but we need enough to be able to turn over on both pieces. Okay, once you've got them all into position, then you're just going to iron them down. Now it's just a hot iron. I don't find that steam or dry makes too much difference. You can over iron and crystallise the glue so that it won't stick. So it's just enough to melt that glue and stick it onto the fabric. Just like that. Okay, and we have all our pieces stuck down in place. Now, if I didn't have a directional fabric and I wasn't interested in lining up my pieces on a particular part of the fabric, then you can put those any direction on the grain. It doesn't really matter. If you had a lot of long oval shaped leaves, you might decide to put them on the bias grain so we have a bit more bias to curve around the edges, but I really don't find that it makes too much difference. So just use every little piece of fabric you can and make the most of your fabric, particularly if you've only got a limited amount and you just have to squeeze out every little last piece you can. As long as you've got that seam allowance between each piece, enough for a good 1/8 of an inch for each piece of paper, then that's fine. Next step is to cut them out. Now it can just be done quite roughly. Once you've spent a little bit of time at the ironing board, this next step of the process can just be done in your lounge chair or in front of the television while you're waiting in the car at the sports game or at the meeting at school. Okay, so we're just going to roughly cut a good 1/8 of an inch. Don't go too small until you get used to the process. You might end up going a little smaller eventually, but let's start with between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch. As I said, it doesn't have to be accurate. Okay, and we'd continue until we had all those cut out ready to go. Now if your paper is lifting a little bit and you didn't iron it enough, you can just iron it again. It doesn't really matter if it's not a complete stick, you just need enough to hold the template onto the fabric. The next step in the process is the glue pen. Now I use a glue pen that's specifically designed for fabric, and it is water soluble. It goes on blue, or there are pink refills as well, but it dries clear. There are lots of brands out there. This is the brand that I use, but anything that is designed for fabric and is a nice fine pen like this will work the same. Now we don't want to use a full flat glue pen. You just need a small line of glue, so you just use one of the edges, and you're going to run a line of glue along the edge of the paper, no wider than the seam allowance, and that way we should never get sticky fingers. Then you simply use your thumb to fold the fabric until you feel the edge of that paper. Now it's not as strong as cardboard or freezer paper, so you can roll it in. We don't want to do that. We just want to fill the edge and then push down onto the glue. Just do a small amount at a time because the glue will dry quite quickly. But it is just the right tackiness that it will instantly hold. When we're going around tight curves, we just want to pleat it or gather it. So you just use your thumbnail on the very edge of the paper and pinch it onto that glue, just a small amount at a time. Now I might have just a little point there, so I'm just going to pull that up and try that one again. So just a little pinch on the edge until I get around the curve. Bit more glue. So longer straight edges, you can just use the pad of your thumb and work quite quickly. When you get to those curves, use that thumbnail and just pinch or gather a small amount at a time. We don't want box pleats, we just want little gathers. If you're having trouble with pointy curves, just try trimming that seam allowance back a little more. But it's quite quick once you get the hang of it. And there's our first piece, all turned and prepared, ready for sewing. Now, there are tools available to assist you if you have trouble, if you've got fumbly thumbs or you don't have much of a thumbnail. There are quite a few different tools out there. These ones are called the Appliqué tools, and they just work in place of your thumb. So we just hold it down with this little fork area on here, and then you use the tool to fold it over and push it onto that glue. And with more practice you'll get that technique quite quickly. A lot of people swear by these tools if your thumb's not working very well for you. So we would continue until we had every piece of our project all glued, ready to go. Okay, circles are usually the bane of all appliques. If you can do a great circle, then you'll be a great appliquer, and that's the first thing that people will look at if they're the applique police. Not that we're too concerned about that. So I'm just going to show you as I glue up this circle. It's no different to anything else, and it's quite simple. So glue around the edge of the paper, no wider than the seam allowance. Then use that thumbnail on the very edge of the piece to gather and push onto that glue, small gathers at a time. I've got a fairly small seam allowance. Finish off my glue and then keep working around. We don't want pointy edges, so gather right on the edge. Don't worry what's happening on the inside of the seam allowance, that's not going to be seen. We want the edge to be smooth. Now when you get back to the starting point, sometimes that's where you get a point. So just pull it up and work through that point again. If you turn it over and look and you're not completely happy, then the glue is repositional. Pull it up and just try again. You can use your nail to smoothen any points, or at the very worst, when we're stitching it down, we can use our needle to smooth it out as well. But look how simple that was, a perfectly smooth circle. So once we have all of our pieces glued and ready to go, then if you like, you don't have to, and I don't very often do this, but you can press them. Just turn them over and press them to set those edges. As I said, I don't often do it, but it's totally up to you, because it means I have to get back up and go back to the ironing board. It does certainly give you a crisper edge. Next, what we would do is we would take our design layout guide. Now this you could print from the CD in the book or in a single pattern. I usually put a full-size design sheet in the pattern. You might have to stick several pages together, but it's there for you to use as a guide if you can't just use your eye and you want to layer things up perfectly. So you put your design layout guide down and then your background fabric. Now today I've got quite a thick piece of linen, so obviously I'm not going to be able to see through it. What I would do then is I would use a light box. So put your design sheet on your light box and then put your background fabric on top and then position all your pieces. Now this method of applique you've probably already realised is like the freezer paper method that you may have used before. The difference is that the applique paper is water soluble, 50% water soluble, so we don't have to remove it. What that means is that we can layer up the whole piece at once. This particular project only has one layer, but if I had several layers, and I've done up to 7 layers, then you can just layer up all the pieces in order. So if it sits underneath another piece, then do it in order until you have your whole block positioned and ready to go. Today we've just got one layer. So I'm just going to use this as a guide because I haven't got my light box to position my pieces. Oops, I don't want that there, I want it there. And it's just a guide, particularly if you look at this project in the book, it was actually a quilt with many blocks exactly the same. So you want them all to be symmetrical and even. That goes there. I can see through just a little bit. So that one goes there and my circle goes there. Now I'm just going to look at my pieces, how I fussy cut them and alternate them like that. Okay, so you can see how I fussy cut on here, so we've got the same shape going around the circle. How I positioned it on the fabric, so I've made it like that. So the next step in the process is gluing all of these pieces onto your fabric so it's ready to take away and stitch them all down, either by hand or by machine. Now you could just continue to use your glue pen that you use to glue the edges over, but instead I use a glue basted, a basting glue, a fabric water soluble basting glue. 2 reasons for this. One is it's cheaper. You go through a lot of these glue pen refills. But the second and main reason is it's a lot stronger. This is the perfect glue for sticking over your edges because it's an instant stick. You just have to fold and press and it will stick straight away. This one you'd have to fold and sit and hold until it dried. But this is repositionable, so it's not strong. You can pull it off again. If I glued up my whole piece and then took it away to stitch, during the stitching process pieces are going to fall off. So the basting glue is a better way to go. It comes in several size bottles, and the ones with the little fine applicator are really handy. So how I do it is I just hold my piece, tuck the tip underneath, and then it's just a few dots in from the edges. You don't want it on the edge. We don't want to be stitching with our needle by hand. But enough to hold each piece in position. Now I like to do this on my ironing board because once I've glued all my pieces, see how I'm just keeping one finger on there so the piece doesn't actually move. I'm just lifting up the edges and tucking under the needle to put the dots of glue there. They're all lined up, they're not going to move out of place, but they're all going to have their glue tucked underneath. Once I've done that, I just iron that glue dry. It sets the glue, gives us a nice strong hold, but also I'm impatient. I don't want to wait for it to dry. But you could just wait for it to dry. Okay, then our design is all glued up, ready to take away on our lap or to the sewing machine to stitch all the pieces down. I'm going to show you the stitching choices in the next video, so keep a watch out for the next one to come, and we'll show you a hand method and a machine method.